vermiliony, orangey, reddy kind of color, and a tree of life that mirrors above and below. There's a tree of life above the ground, but the roots are a tree of life below, and that's how trees grow. But it looks so similar. I mean, that tomato is such a beautiful tomato.
Okay, we're moving along. We're out on YouTube.
Oh.
I'm just going to bring John Jackson and Sherry in here.
Oh. Okay, there's one. Oh, John and Sherry.
Hello.
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 And I see Sherry Robinson is here from Hawaii. So we got Georgia and Sherry. And I think Kule is coming in. She said that she's coming in this morning. Hey, hi Sherry.
Hi Sherry.
Aloha. Hi Marianne.
Oh, good. She's
Hi, John and Ash and Sherry.
From Hawaii.
Hi.
And pressing the right buttons.
Hi, Marianne. Hi, good morning.
All right. So
hello, Catherine.
We're out live stream on YouTube, so I'm going to switch this.
Good morning, John and Sherry. Is Sherry with you, John?
She's here. She'll be here in a moment. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, maybe you should go on the inside.
I will.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning, Sherry.
Morning.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. We still have a couple more people arriving, and I'm just admitting them, and then I'd like to, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce you to Deborah McLaughlin, who for the last 35 years has been my wife, and I have had a true spiritual journey in that 35 years. And Debbi, let's see, what have we said about her? She's been immersed in spiritual paths throughout her life, first as a Northern Baptist, later in the religious traditions of Japan, and finally as a Tibetan Buddhist. She's completed a 3-year retreat by home study in 7 years without ever aspiring to ordination, and has been a leader in Buddhist circles in the Washington, D.C. area for over 25 years. Debbi works on the philanthropy team of a local hospice and has completed her year-long intensive course on companioning the dying, and as a funeral celebrant, meaning that she officiates at funerals for people who are not affiliated with a faith tradition. Debbi serves as an unpaid vigil volunteer for her hospice, and we've been married and balancing one another for 35 years, and we've both been moved by physicist David Bohm's dictum about the universe, unbroken wholeness in constant flowing motion. And so I'm not going to take words out of Debbi's mouth, so I won't read the quote that we put out on the promo for this, but I will ask you, or I'm going to mute so that Debbi can unmute and tell us her story. So Debbi, go for it.
May I begin?
Yes.
Well, greetings, everyone. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope that this time we spend together today, for those of us who are Americans, will give us a little break from our interesting mix of national emergencies. And for those of you who are not Americans, that maybe you'll come away thinking there are a few of us who haven't gone totally bonkers yet. But I was asked by Nancy Pfaff to share my spiritual path, which I have to confess is not just challenging, it's really humbling. In truth, my path has been more like a never-ending grope through shifting myths, punctuated by frequent and inelegant stumbles. And over the years, I've lost it and doubted it and regained it any number of times. So it's a work in progress. But also along the way, I've realized that the path is always there for me. It's in me and working on me. It's morphing to get my attention. It's giving me endless chances. So while it's not neat or pretty, the way it unfolds under my feet often feels like pure grace and pure mystery. And it makes me feel awe and gratitude more often than not. So for me, in trying to talk to you today, the question is, what can anyone authentically share about what's a very personal inner experience that is of any use and relevance to anyone else, regardless of what path they may or may not be following? And what can be shared that might help and inspire others on their own path? So after wrestling with that a little bit, well, wrestling with it a lot, I decided to share some things about my path that give a sense of what it's like as a lived experience, what it's like for me to try and walk a spiritual path in the midst of modern life. And that gives a sense to you also about how I've changed from walking that path, but also how the path has changed under me, under my own feet. So it'll mostly be a snapshot of my path right now, inevitably, which means it's highly subject to change. And if I came back and were to give a similar talk a year from now on the same topic, and was saying the same things, you'd know I was stuck, and you'd have my permission and encouragement to shake me up and get me moving again. Now, hopefully there'll be some things that resonate for you. And if not, please, please, please ignore what I say. My map that I'll be describing today is not my territory, let alone yours. Now, my core path is Tibetan Buddhist, and there are many forms of Buddhism, as many of you know, but most traditional Buddhist lineages do not proselytize. We're taught not to be attached to our own belief and experiences, let alone assume they're right for anyone else. And still, I'd like to think that the flavor of my practice comes through in my basic being. But I also know that's often far from true. I have few illusions about how far along I am on the path. And I've learned not to worry about that too much, just to keep walking, keep moving. So we'll come back at the end and ask you, open it up, because I'm hoping others will share what it's like for you to walk a spiritual path and how you've changed and how the path has changed for you. And that's the part of this that I'm really looking forward to, is when we open up and discuss more. As I was thinking about where to start, I thought, well, before and while walking a spiritual path, it kind of helps to get clear for oneself about what you think a spiritual path is and where it's leading you. So I thought I'd start by taking a moment to share a couple of perspectives that have been useful to me. So what makes a spiritual path spiritual, to start with? And there's a good reason to ask that question in this modern age where popular culture has discovered mindfulness and espouses various forms of what could be called spiritual fast food, meditation. And while it may help people de-stress and improve their ability to cope with and perform well in everyday life, and while it may have real and practical benefits, it's still an ego path based on ordinary identity and awareness, a path that does not question one's fundamental relationship to the speed and aggression of modern life and the excesses of ego. By contrast, I think a spiritual path has aims beyond a mere focus on self-improvement and beyond waking consciousness, aims that include limitless expression of compassionate motivation, and that explores the entire spectrum of consciousness. What any spiritual path is a path to is beyond words, beyond thought, beyond description. Words will fail. Both Christ and Buddha didn't want to teach because of this. They had to be convinced to teach. They knew that one can only really point towards the way that each of us ourselves must walk. They knew that words would become a problem. And my, haven't they? We fight over them. The alchemy of wisdom and compassion underlies many faiths, and many contemplative paths across the ages have brought countless people to the same wordless pointing. And spiritual paths tend to start out firm under the feet of the resolute pilgrim, but eventually the path, the pilgrim, and the act of walking begin to soften and then vanish. The vanishing actually is the path. It's like we're walking different paths suited to help us clear our unique personal fogs and reveal the true sun-drenched vast sky of our unity consciousness. Now, one more thing about spiritual paths generally. My particular take on what a spiritual path is involves a certain perspective on other paths that not everyone may agree with. But it holds that as long as your faith or ethical impulse keeps opening your mind and heart and keeps de-weaponizing your body, speech, and mind, that it's a valid spiritual path. And within this context, you can choose to believe in one God, many, or none. Since eventually one has to drop all beliefs, it really doesn't matter. But then that's just a belief too. The spiritual path is full of paradox. So before I get into really telling you about my path and what my daily practice is like, just 3 quick definitions. There are some terms that we Buddhists use that can cause a lot of confusion. And so I want to just try to quickly clarify them. One is the term enlightenment. Well, what's that? Well, we know it can't be described, but attempts abound nonetheless. And so let me just share a few kind of pithy sayings about enlightenment that have helped me at various points in time. One is when glimpses of one's own true nature and the nature of reality become an unbroken, direct, lived experience. Unbroken awareness of impermanence and interdependence in every moment. Another saying is that one doesn't actually become enlightened, one simply ceases to be deluded. It's not going anywhere, adding anything. It's actually a process of removal of obscurations. And then Skip in his introduction mentioned one that comes from the world of quantum physics and physicist Robert Bohm. Unbroken wholeness in constant flowing motion. That is just such a lovely phrase. And some of you may be familiar with Ken Wilber, who describes enlightenment as no boundary awareness, limitless awareness. So second, what is a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva in Buddhism is someone who, for the sake of others, vows to attain complete enlightenment. It's someone who remains in and keeps returning to the world lifetime after lifetime to help. As, say, a bodhisattva lawyer, or a bodhisattva nurse, or a bodhisattva grocery store clerk during a pandemic. They're actually everywhere. And the third term, when you hear me say meditational deity, if that term is unfamiliar to you, you might want to think archetype, since the term refers to the energetic expression of particular facets of the enlightened mind that one is seeking to unite with and directly experience. So it's not a deity in the Judeo-Christian sense of God, and it is definitely not something that is worshipped. So with that, by way of preamble, a little bit more about my spiritual practice, starting with my rambling path to get to where I am. In headlines only, I promise. Raised in Northern Maine, Northern Baptist upbringing. And in college, studied East Asian cultures and religions, and went off after college to live in Japan for several years. Then in my late 20s and 30s, I got into some new agey stuff. I got seriously into the Celestine prophecy for a while, and quite a bit of spiritual science fiction, and that was fun. And then I had lots of social activism in my life in the late 20s and 30s. And that kind of left me on the doorstep of physical burnout and compassion fatigue. And in ways I didn't appreciate at the time, really brought me to the doorstep of Tibetan Buddhism. And my encounter with Tibetan Buddhism began at age 40, when literally a copy of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying fell off a bookstore shelf into my hands. And I thought that synchronicity shouldn't be ignored, and read it cover to cover over a weekend. Came out and pronounced to Skip that if I was told I had to live on a desert island for the rest of my life and could only take one book, that would be it. And so that began my study of and practice of Tibetan Buddhism, and continues to this day, with it being my core practice, with other elements I've folded in around it, because as I've come across my aspects of my own fog and my own habits and obscurations, I've had to get a little creative around the edges of Tibetan Buddhism, and I'll have some fun telling you about that a bit. And the other thing in terms of where I am right now is I feel like my spiritual practice is really well harmonized with my livelihood, my right livelihood, working at hospice and being a vigil volunteer. So key influences for which and whom I'm grateful, well, I start with nature, the cathedral pine trees in Maine, and I love birds, and I can never get enough of the views of Mount Fuji, or any of the views that we get to see of the cosmos through the Hubble telescope and other amazing telescopes we have. I also have to thank a fourth grade Sunday school teacher in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, who was so boring that I had my first out-of-body experience. And that actually was very, very important to me and opened up that there were things beyond my current vision and perspective that I might want to explore. At that early age, I had no idea what they were, but boredom pushed me to it. And then we had a lot of foreign visitors to our home who came from a variety of faith traditions, people from all over the world when I was growing up, who exposed me to a lot of Buddhism, but also to atheism, and even some Christian missionaries from the Philippines who had some very interesting perspectives. And then I would have to mention also haiku and other poetry of presence that get as close as words can get to the indescribable. And I have found that to be just a source of great beauty and often joy. I'm grateful to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, with whom I have taken refuge and twice taken the Bodhisattva vow, to Sogyal Rinpoche and other masters who I have been fortunate to receive teachings from, and my current main teachers, His Holiness Garchen Rinpoche and Khenpo Samdup Rinpoche. And also spiritual friends, some of whom are on this call, Joss and Catherine and Ku and others. You know who you are. Thank you so much. So, switching to talk a bit about my aims and aspirations in my practice. My practice not only has the goal of enlightenment, which I obviously share with a lot of people, but also a goal that expresses the kind of enlightened activity that I aspire to specialize and carry out. And I've written an aspiration prayer, which I recite regularly to remind myself of my goal of helping those who are dying on my way to and beyond enlightenment. And I'd like to share that with you. Hold on just a minute here, because I'm going to have to share my screen. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read it aloud so you have the feeling of it. You're welcome to listen to it with your eyes closed if you would like. With bodhicitta in my heart, and with the aspiration to walk the bodhisattva path, in this life and future lives, may I offer help to those who are dying in whatever capacity I am able. May that capacity increase further and further as I grow in wisdom and compassion until I reach full enlightenment. May I approach life and death with great faith and confidence and help others to do the same. And as I practice with great diligence and prepare myself for death, may my certainty in the view increase, and may all living beings benefit from my efforts. At the time of death, may each of us find ease in dying and swift rebirth in the pure realm of great bliss, quickly gaining enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. I also have to focus on creating the right environment for my practice. And I actually have 3 practice spaces. The first one that you see here is my Tibetan Buddhist shrine with various images of teachers and meditational deities and offering bowls representing everything of beauty and wholesomeness that can be offered from the universe. And there's just a close-up of one part of it. When the light is shining just right on my shrine, it's really quite amazing how it is illuminated and helps illuminate me. And then the other 2 spaces, it's sitting in a chair looking out our deck window out to where there are trees and birds and a nice open sky to gaze at. And thirdly, on the right, is my artist space, where I do my creative work, my writing. I write poetry, I journal. I like to color mandalas and do pen and ink drawings. And so this is a space that I have that's for that. And I'll tell you more about how that fits in. Now I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute. And I want to tell you a bit about my daily practice. It's actually a continuum of daytime and nighttime practice that I'm working with now. And I'll tell you right now, I'm much further along and better at the daytime practice than the nighttime. But the frontier for me which is very exciting, is the nighttime practice. And I have two modes of practice because I'm semi-retired. I'm working 3 days a week, full-time on those days. And on those days when I wake up, I do about 50 minutes of practice. On the days when I'm not working, I can be more leisurely about it and do about an hour and a half of practice. I'm going to tell you more about what the practice is. And as you listen, I would suggest that don't focus so much on the details of what my practice is, as on the way it's a dance with awareness, because that's really what it's about, that dancing with awareness. And that's why it's constantly changing, because I'm the partner with the path and vice versa. And we're working with each other. So starting the day, before getting out of bed, I renew the night's dreams, if there are any that I remember. And I'm going to hold that and not say more about that right now, because I'll talk more about dream yoga in a bit. And I establish my compassionate motivation and my resolve for the day. And I do several prayers and contemplations that refresh my compassion and my appreciation of this brief but precious human life. And then I'll get out of bed, still trying to move slowly and not wake up too quickly, and move to that space that you saw with the outside view. And I'll enjoy a cup of coffee. There's nothing inherently Tibetan Buddhist about this, but nothing it goes against. But I'll gaze out at nature. And this lets me kind of companionably awake with my senses and engage them and get grounded in my physical body. And also in just my kind of animal nature. Heck, I'm a mammal. That's a part of who I am. And to just kind of rest with that at the beginning of the day is actually a very cozy thing to do. So while I'm sipping that coffee and feeling the warmth of the cup and the steam of it and the heat of it on my face and the taste of it, I'm quietly communing with the dawn, the birds, noticing that kind of first breath of the breeze in the trees. And I've learned that for me, this very simple grounding step makes a really big difference and is not to be skipped, because I tend to be really heady, really in my head. So having that physical grounding is important to me. And from there, I put down my coffee cup and assume my meditation position and expel a few breaths of air to clear out any foul, stagnant air. And I begin my Tibetan Buddhist core formal practice for the day. And this involves prayers and visualizations and mantras associated with different meditational deities. But I've really simplified it over time to be based on what is a one-word saying that essentializes all of the Buddha's teachings, which is this: commit not a single unwholesome action, cultivate a wealth of virtue, and tame this mind of ours. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So that one line is the framework for my formal practice. And I start with sitting practice, cultivating present awareness, just sitting, resting in the here and now. When my attention wanders, I just lightly bring it back to my breath, non-judgmentally. You can't have a mind without having thoughts. And so that non-judgmental part of it is really important. Your thoughts are something you work with in sitting practice. And the practice helps me change my relationship to my thoughts so that I'm not continually their victim. I'm not carried away by them and under their control. And after that sitting practice, to just settle, let my thoughts settle naturally. What comes next are 3 sets of visualization and mantra practices based on 3 meditational deities. And visualization, by the way, I should explain, is the practice of experiencing the subtle form of the enlightened body. And mantra recitation is the practice of experiencing the subtle energy of enlightened speech. So just keep that in mind as I'm mentoring these. So remember I said there were 3 parts to that phrase summarizing the teachings of the Buddha. The first, related to commit not a single unwholesome action, is practices that bring to light and purify harmful ways that I have used and continue to use my body, speech, and mind. And that involves visualizing a deity called Vajrasattva and chanting Om Benza Sato Hung. And right now, I'm especially working on bringing to awareness and disarming ways that I harm myself and others through avoidance and withholding and neglect. And that can bring to light some uncomfortable, even painful memories and realizations. But those are healed in this practice with lovely flows of nectar, healing nectar, and radiant light, healing light. So the second part of the Buddha's teachings was cultivate a wealth of virtue. And so related to that, I do compassion prayers and practices to keep opening my heart. I'm visualizing Avalokiteshvara and chanting Om Mani Padme Hung. And I'm also reciting 2 beautiful prayers that Shantideva wrote in the 8th century that His Holiness the Dalai Lama recites daily and that have particular meaning for me. And I also recite a particular COVID practice that the Garchen Sangha is doing, and a world peace prayer as well, that entire worldwide Sangha does daily. And that helps me feel very connected, not that I'm just sitting alone doing my practice. And thirdly, related to the third part of the saying about the Buddha's teachings, tame this mind of ours, there are practices related to expanding my consciousness 24/7 throughout life, including dreams and sleep, and beyond this life, visualizing Amitabha and chanting Om Ami Dewa Hri. And these practices are focused on preparing myself for the time of death and for supporting those who are dying, both anyone I know personally and all those in the care of the hospice where I work. So that's the core of my formal practice. I dedicate at the end of it so that all beings would benefit whatever fruits there are from it. And then I move into my day trying to integrate. And one of the nice things about Tibetan Buddhism is there's a real focus on integration, on taking the fruits of your formal practice off the cushion into your daily life. It's really about breaking down that dichotomy between thinking you're meditating part of the time and not meditating the rest of the time. And trying to be mindful and aware throughout the day. So how does that happen? Well, for me, a lot of it is through frequent reminders in the form of images and phrases that I bring to mind that instantly and briefly, because after all, I do have work to do and things to do in ordinary life, but they briefly bring me back to that kind and level of awareness that I was experiencing through the deeper practice in my formal meditation. And so I might imagine on the crown of my head that some of those meditational deities are sitting there, kind of moving like a lighthouse beam, keeping an eye out and helping me maintain my awareness. Or there's a visualization of 3 smiles, 3 beautiful crescents, a silver one running through my brow, through my heart, a golden one, and down in my pelvis, a red one. And they're representing my wisdom, my relatedness to others, and my actual physical being, my animal being as well. So those 3 smiles are something I can just flash on. And then I find that there are lots of phrases that I've heard, several from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that I love to just bring to mind briefly. One of his, when I'm upset with something that is happening, is to flash on his phrase, every situation has a right to be. It couldn't possibly be otherwise. Causes of conditions have brought circumstances to this point. Accept what that is and work with it. You can change it, but work with it. There's no sense worrying about how it came to be the way it is. Another that he says is, I is merely a designation. So I might find that I am getting very upset with someone, and I can stop and ask myself, who is it who thinks she's angry at this person? And pull myself back just a little bit from that precipice of anger. Another thing, and this relates to the dream yoga later, is reminding myself frequently during the day of the kind of dream-like nature of my identity and my experiences. And that's something that emerges naturally from the formal practice. But to just come back and remind myself during the day and these flashes is something that's very helpful. There's also integration in the form of compassion practice during the day. While watching the news, which can be so painful and almost unbearable these days, to do the practice of Tonglen, of breathing in the suffering that I'm seeing on the screen and exhaling love and comfort and relief. Another compassion practice is when I'm finding myself less than compassionate, to stop and view the other person as another me. They too just want to be happy. They too just want to make their way through this world without too much suffering. So that can be a useful pause. And then finally, another means of integration that I work with is trying to take insights from my practice on board more deeply through journaling or writing poetry. And I actually have a poetry website. I'm going to share screen again here. And let's see. I have a website with all my poetry, which includes a goodly amount of Dharma poetry, called meangirl.net. And I wanted to just read you one example of a poem that came to me as I was working with accumulating mantras. Because when I started out, I really resisted mantras. I thought, this is dumb. I'm just thumbing a mala and just counting these mantras. And I learned over time by sticking with it, by letting the mantras work on me, what they're really about. And this poem tries to capture that. So I'd like to read it to you and invite you to close your eyes and listen to this. In the beginning, impossible, like pi and the speed of light, like the number of galaxies in the cosmos, a mind-stopping thought, an absurd imaginary number. The only thing to do is start. In the middle, heroic quest, a haunted Herculean effort to hit the siren lofty mark. Beset by doubts and excuses, the glacial tally taunts, while I'm slow to trust the X in the equation. In the end, only grace, beyond hope or fear or goal. In the end, it turns out there is no end. No calculating habit, no sums to add, no one to do the math. And so that was when I was, for the first time, trying to accumulate 100,000 of a particular mantra. which I think you can guess by the end of the poem that I did eventually do and did eventually overcome some of that resistance. I also, just as a kind of humorous aside, want to point out that new technology can be very helpful on the path. And so on my iPhone, I have my mala mode, which is how I keep track of my mantras. I use at the top of the screen, you can see my traditional mala and the mala counter that I actually use while I'm accumulating. And at the end of the formal practice, I update on my iPhone my count, because these are often offered at different times of the year to the teacher and the community. And then you'll see on the right-hand side, there are a few other things. The green lotus bud is a wonderful way to set little chimes that go off during the day, so that if you're trying to remind yourself of a particular image or saying, the way I was telling you before, that prompts you to just stop right then and flash on that image or flash on that saying or mantra. Stop that screen share for a moment. Okay, now I'm going to get into, which is what I think probably was why Nancy first asked me to do this. I think she might have been interested in dream yoga and the nighttime practice. And I have to start with a big caveat. I am still very much a novice at this, but I know enough at this point to at least share a few things about what it is and what I'm working towards and with, and then also share some resources with you that might be helpful. So what the nighttime practices of dream yoga and of even deeper practice of sleep yoga are about in Tibetan Buddhism are cultivating unbroken and greater awareness and extending your spiritual practice 24/7. So it's a way of actually bringing the 8 hours that we sleep onto the path, and of working with non-waking states of consciousness. In the day, of course, we're working with waking states. And dream yoga it builds on lucid dreaming and talks about lucid dreaming, but it goes beyond it and has different aims, because it really has that dimension of bringing your spiritual practice into your dreams and sleep. I don't know a lot about Western dream analysis. I'm told that it's different from, but complementary to Western dream analysis. Certainly, Tibetan dream yoga is concerned with the nature of your dreams and the subtle energetic basis of 3 different types of dreams that you learn to recognize and work differently with. It's not really concerned with the meaning and interpretation of dreams, especially not with the first type of dreams, which are called karmic dreams. That's not quite so true with dreams of clarity and clear light dreams, where the meaning and interpretation can be more important. So what's involved in dream yoga is recognizing, first of all, that you are dreaming, and recognizing while you're lucid in that way, that you remembering that you have the potential to challenge and overcome your ordinary mind's limitations. You can play with your experiences when you're dreaming, but you can also play with your identity when you're dreaming. And I have to share one funny anecdote about that. Normally I don't share experiences, let alone dream experiences, but this one was such a hoot. I had set the intention when I went to sleep one night that I wanted to experience another identity in my dream, other than to not be Debbie McLaughlin in my dream. And so as a result, I fell into sleep thinking, this is potentially going to be interesting. And I found myself waking up in a dream where I was logging on my cell phone to my Amazon Smile shopping account. But when I went to log on, there was no ID for Debbie McLaughlin. The ID was for someone named Vincent Smith. And so I logged in my dream as Vincent Smith, and I thought, well, this is interesting. I've got access to his credit card. I want to see what's on his wish list. And so I started going through the dream, but I have to confess, I just started laughing in the middle of the dream, and that woke me right up, darn it. And I haven't had that dream since, but it was just an amusing anecdote of how my dreams came back to me and said, so you think you want to play with another identity? Here's one for you. So then that's the recognizing the potential to overcome your mind's normal limitations, the way you think about identity, the way you think about experience. If you want to be an Olympic athlete in a dream, you could be one. If you want to be a Tibetan saint from centuries ago, you could work with that experience in your dreams over time. But the real importance of dream yoga is also carrying that mental pliancy out into your waking life. Because how often do we walk around in our waking life just having such rigid definitions in our minds of who we are and what we're capable of and what other people are capable of, and how hard and firm and frozen situations are, where we don't even try to work with them. We just assume they're unworkable. So this pliancy from dream yoga is something that you want to bring over into waking life and is very, very much a part of it. So it's a 24-hour cycle of these waking and non-waking practices. There are foundation practices you engage with during the day and right before sleep. And I do have to say that until you have a stable meditation practice during the waking state of consciousness, it's probably hard for most people to make much progress with dream yoga, let alone the even deeper practice of sleep yoga. And so be patient with yourself. Don't feel that you're not working on dream yoga. Whenever you're sitting and doing sitting meditation, you are calming your mind and preparing for it in that way. And I would also say that dream and sleep yogas are considered to be stepping stones in Tibetan Buddhism to having stable awareness at the time of death. And we're taught that it's possible, but probably not very likely, that you would be able to have stable awareness at the moment of death if you hadn't been able to achieve that while you were living during dream and sleep yoga. So I'm not going to say much more there because I don't have a lot more that I can share or should share, but I did want to do this and share some resources with you. I'm sure Skip will send this PowerPoint around after the fact. Okay, what is this? There. These 3 books that you see here really are quite a set together. The one on the left by Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche is a very traditional book about Tibetan dream and sleep yoga. And so for a lot of people, it may not be the best place to start. I contrast with it Patricia Garfield's book, and she actually has several of them related to dreaming. This one is Creative Dreaming. This is much more of a Western approach. And so for some people, that's a great place to start. And then personally, I absolutely love Dream Yoga by Andrew Holacek because he does such a masterful job of bringing the two together, the two traditions together. And so I would recommend any or all of those, starting where you wish, for anyone who would like to explore that further. Now, I'm going to move on and talk briefly about other parts of my practice. There are special practice days and commitments. There are 4 big Buddhist festival days annually that mark key events in the life of the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. there are different teachings and prayers and practices within the Buddhist communities I belong to that advance our practice, that support others who are having difficulty, and that honor our teachers and the long lineage that we inherit and continue. And I also have some other elements of special training and practice in Poa and Bardo practices for the time of death, mainly done during retreat and then practiced with special practices. It's not so much a daily practice. But these are building my capacity, even though I largely do them aspirationally, because I haven't fully realized them yet, but helping myself work towards sustaining awareness through all the stages of life and death and all states of consciousness. Wouldn't that be lovely? Other customized elements that I've added. I mentioned before, I'm someone who lives too much in my head. So I've added some body awareness and sense perception practices. You heard about the coffee cup one. There are others. As a woman, I enjoy connecting emotionally and physically with the natural rhythms of life. And I haven't always found, frankly, that the Tibetan Buddhist practice, which is a male monastic practice, always helps me do that. And so I've added some things around the edges. And personally, I've needed to work on cultivating joy. I've tended to have a rather Puritan, head down, darn it, I'm going to do it attitude towards practice, and to just relax and be joyful about it and enjoy it has been something I've had to work with more on my own around the edges. As a Westerner who knows and respects science, I've enjoyed integrating cognitive science, some things I've learned about it, with ancient meditation practices. And a little teeny bit, I'm certainly not a quantum physicist, but some of the things that are out there that show how traditional Tibetan Buddhist perception and quantum physics are arriving at some of the same conclusions, perhaps. As a senior, I'm simplifying and working deeply with essential practices. I do far fewer than I once did. I'm really trying to get a few practices in myself at the brain stem level, quite literally, so that they will be there for me when I need them, at the time when my personality is dissolving at the moment of death. And then I also do a number of practices working with subtle bodies and energies. Light body, Tai Chi, Jinshin Jutsu are among them. And again, I'm just going to share a few more books with you briefly. Awakening Body, The Mind Illuminated, and Meditation Secrets for Women. These relate to several of the customized practices I mentioned, of course. And then related to joy, the Radiant Sutras and the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Treat yourself, get these books. They are so wonderful. And it doesn't matter what path you're on, they will just make your heart sing. And then I would also mention Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way and her approach to journaling, creativity, and cultivating your creativity through journaling. And part of my practice is also sharing a little bit of what I do. I have a YouTube channel where I share teachings about Jinshin Jutsu and guide practices with Tai Chi cloud hands. Read a couple of my poetry collections as well. But that's something that is a work in progress. And another form of sharing that I engage in involves honoring others' paths. And I've created a website called The Feather, One Person, One Feather, One Piece of Peace. And it consists of inviting people to make a personal commitment to the 5 aspirations that I hope you can see here on your screen. And they basically amount to honoring and celebrating others' paths. Because after all, what's not to celebrate? Whenever someone finds a wholesome path that they can actually keep their feet on and keep moving ahead with, is that not wonderful, no matter what that path is? And so the feather aspiration cultivates that kind of tolerance and mutual celebration and invites people to wear a feather, as I am today. I'm not sure if you can see it. I'll hold it up when I stop sharing screen here. But that way we will know when we see other people wearing feathers that perhaps they too have taken these or made a personal commitment to these 5 aspirations. I need to read them? Okay. 1, slow down and give others the gift of my time and attention. 2, disarm myself by being less aggressive in my thoughts, words, and actions. 3, simplify my life so that I spend less of my time and energy striving to acquire and keep wealth and material goods. 4, follow a path, whether a religious faith or a non-religious ethical code of conduct, that inspires and supports me to avoid harming others and cultivate more loving kindness towards others. And 5, refrain from trying to convert others to my own path or from disrespecting others because they follow a different path. And so the feather symbolizes that one is doing inner work that is trying to take yourself more lightly and live more gently. That's why the imagery of the feather. So I invite you to visit that and share that at any time with others. I'd like to see a lot more feathers out there. Okay, and I said I'd share. I'm wearing my feather today, as you can see. Maybe there you can see. Okay. So. Okay, so wrapping up here with a few things. Signs of progress. We're taught to look for them on the path as part of an honest and non-judgmental self-evaluation. And I have to say, I have seen enough progress in myself over the years to be encouraged. I've also seen enough lack of it to know how much work remains to be done. And so some of the things that we're taught to look for in Tibetan Buddhism is, are you less reactive, less prickly? Are you less of a problem to others? Are you less wedded to your conventional identity and to real world measures of success and achievement? Are you more accepting of people and situations? Do you feel more contented? Do you feel more gratitude? Do you notice that you're better able to respond to people and situations compassionately, appropriately, and effectively? Are you more consistently able to see whatever life presents to you as workable and to not be as thrown by external circumstances? Do you find you're less afraid of death and perhaps better prepared to meet its spiritual opportunities? Do you have more frequent and longer moments of no boundary awareness and have some better ability to consciously return to them? Do you notice that you're holding both your beliefs and your doubts more lightly and skillfully? Maybe seeing them kind of like patches on a coat. They can be very useful, but they will eventually fall off. And I also wanted to share just a few things of what I've learned about the path from walking it. I've learned it's really about a way of being, a different way of being. It's not just something else to do, something to cram into your busy life and to stress out over when you feel you don't have enough time for it. You make the space for it, and you'll find it creates more. I've learned to just make an earnest start. The path is already in you. It teaches you. You're really uncovering your own wisdom mind after all. And it's taught me many things. For example, just in the recent week, I was noticing how tight and grasping my eyes were. And the sitting meditation itself actually taught me how to have a gaze. An image of a newborn baby came to mind. And to have a gaze that's like looking lovingly at that newborn baby. And when I found myself blinking a lot, to gently shift my awareness to the outer corners of my eyelids. I'm not saying this would work for everyone, but these were things that came to me while I was practicing, that the path taught me. And when I paid attention to them and worked with them, they worked, and they worked on me. I've learned that no matter what formal path you might start on, at some point, you ultimately have to be the alchemist of your own enlightenment and feel your own way. And why? Well, that's because your confusion and your obscurations are unique to you. And only you can recognize them and bring them to light. Only you can be the alchemist of your own enlightenment. I've found that indeed my relationships to my beliefs and my doubts have changed. They're less of a big deal. They don't hold me hostage so much. I come to be a little suspicious if I find I'm using them as kind of armament, as a way of shielding or protecting myself or separating myself from others. And I've come to see the radiance in them, the energy behind their comings and their goings, as being as much about, as much what they are about as anything. I've learned that it's really hard to keep all the balls up in the air. There's a lot of practice and a lot of things going on in life, but I've learned to be more self-forgiving and give myself a break. But I've also learned to be honest about when I'm really doing the best I can, and that just has to be good enough. And when, on the other hand, nah, I'm slacking off, got to kick myself in the butt. Yeah. So knowing the difference between the two. I've learned it's easy to get in a very comfortable practice routine and then feel annoyed and disturbed when special practice requests come around. So I constantly have to guard against turning my practice into a kind of hothouse flower. It's important to keep letting the fresh air in and keep letting the weeds in, because that's what keeps it alive and keeps it flowing. I've learned I have to continue to be okay with stumbling. The path, after all, is really about pulling the rug out from underneath me and all my false certainties. And it's going to do so until there's no more rug and no more me and no more need for a path. So I might as well get used to it and work with it. So in closing, I've gone beyond worrying about what path I'm on. I'm trying, usually not succeeding, but trying to take everything that's happening in the world and my reactions to it as the path. That's really challenging these days. And I'm trying to be more spacious and generous and less reactive. I'm not particularly worried anymore about attaining enlightenment, which sounds odd, giving my aspiration prayer. But at the absolute level, I'm already there, even though that's not my day-to-day lived experience. I have to keep working at that. And on the relative level, as the Dalai Lama said, the job's the same, whether or not you're enlightened. Relieving the suffering of the world, cultivating loving kindness. As I get older, I notice everything is getting kind of softer and meltier, I guess, more muted. And it's not blurry vision. It's not something I'm trying to fix. I'm hoping actually that by the time I die in this life or some future life, there won't be any fearful or constricted me who's left, who's terribly bothered by dying. And maybe my fog will have vanished and I'll have lightened my karmic load enough to add my shimmer to the clear sunlit sky. Or at least maybe I'll have planted seeds in my mind stream that will help me recognize and make good use of spiritual opportunities in future lives, if there are any. And I say if there are any, because even though I believe that now, that too is just a belief. It's just a patch on the coat that might fall off. So I'll end by saying thank you, Nancy, for posing this challenge. I know that you and others have your own long and rich experiences with your own path, which I honor and celebrate. And I'm really hoping now that you'll consider sharing some gems from. And I'm going to close by putting back up on the screen the two questions that we started with in the beginning. Whoops. And posing them now to all of you with gratitude for your time and attention. And the questions are, what have you learned from your experience of walking a spiritual path? And how has your path changed you? How has your path changed? And I am happy to try and answer questions, but I don't know how much more I have to say. Thank you all.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm going to be going intermittently back and forth between Debbie's and my microphone because since we're sitting actually back to back here, there's feedback. But I'd like to invite Nancy Pfaff, who was the instigator of this and persuaded Deb to do it. And I appreciate that very much, Nancy, if you want to have a comment or a question first.
Well, thank you very much. And Debbie, that was very, very helpful. So well organized and step by step and very clear. So I appreciate your presentation and the way your mind works. I think one of the things I've picked up from you today is how a spiritual practice can be a help in terms of helping us return to that place of center, that place of non-dual awareness. And I have come through in recent months, probably since the pandemic started, a tremendous shift in consciousness, so that, and shift in identity. And my brain has changed. And I'm living in two worlds at the same time, you know, the non-dual awareness, and at the same time, my ordinary awareness and my old patterns and different things that are there that I need to stay alert to and move back from. And I love the fact that you had something you could say that would help you switch back into that more centered place when caught up in whatever, whether it's the instincts or old patterns or whatever that always are there to pull us out of that non-dual awareness. And the fact that you are so committed and have been for so many years inspires me, because that's been my life as well from a very young age, starting with Sunday school, Methodist Sunday school, and then graduating to where I am now, which I'm a kind of a mixed breed, you might say, of so many different philosophies and spiritual practices and paths. And it's just lovely to see that commitment over so many years and how that has refined and changed you and opened you to be of such service in the world, including your websites, my goodness, into technology and poetry. This is exciting, seeing the creativity that's bubbling forth from you. And it's encouraging too to just know that the path we're on is a changing path. It's evolving us as we are attentive to it, and that we just are often in a place of unknowing where we just are putting one foot in front of the other, and the path, as you say, gives us some guidance, brings something to mind, an image, a word. The dream yoga was something I had never heard of. So that I'm especially grateful to you, and I'll probably look into some of those books. And I do like the fact that you showed us various books that we can count on and gain from. So for me, it's been just of high importance. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was your Bodhisattva vow. And do you have any sense that that you have had past lives and are a continuing Bodhisattva? I don't know if that's an appropriate question or not, but I myself have had a similar impulse, and very interested in that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. Those are just very wonderful comments, and a couple of quick reactions. I've really had, I hope no one thinks that my spiritual evolution has been this wonderful kind of seamless succession of steps. There have been many times when I just totally dropped the practice for a while, and what I've learned in retrospect is even then it was working on me. Even then the path was working on me. It was a kind of gestation phase. It wouldn't let me go, wouldn't go away. It would bring me back at some point eventually. And related to your question about past lives, I've never had a clear past life regression, but I must say there have been two places and instances in my life where things have happened that one could say suggests there were past lives, that I couldn't have known things that I knew, and had been able to react in the way I did without some kind of carryover effect. But I must say I've never been drawn to have a past life regression. It's actually one of the things that some of my teachers have said, not yet. You know, when it happens, it happened naturally for the Buddha at the moment of enlightenment. It'll happen naturally for you then too. You don't have to particularly worry about it. But I just know me, that I could probably get really into that and I shouldn't. So it's just very personal. But I've also had some other friends who have much more clarity about past lives, who have told me I was there. And so that's very interesting to hear too. So very comforting. To me, I take comfort. Some people feel like the idea of there being rebirth and life after life after life is just overwhelming. One life is enough. And for me, that's not the case. Well, I feel it is one life at a time. I also take great comfort in just that, being part of something so vast. And if that's how it turns out to be, that'll be a moment of great joy, realizing that. So.
Thanks, Debbie.
So you don't have to stand on ceremony here. Please speak up.
Microphones, Skip. Well, I have a question. Oh,
Go ahead.
okay. I guess I'm on. Sorry, Jerome. First of all, thank you. That was lovely. And I'm happy that it will be on YouTube so I can watch it again. So thank you very much. My question is about being stuck, which in a way you have answered. And I have been stuck so many times, and I'm currently stuck, so that's why I'm interested in this. But even now in my stuckness, it's kind of like a big yawn. Oh, darn, I'm stuck again. And, this too shall pass. And it usually means there's a big paradigm shift. So I'm not as dramatic by being stuck as I used to be. But my question is, when you're stuck, like you described a lovely and rather elaborate process, like in your daily meditation or whatever we call it. So when you're stuck, do you still do all of that, or is it like meaningless? And in a way you kind of answered it earlier, I think, but could you just respond to that again? Any comments on stuckness?
Oh yeah, I'm an expert. I'm an absolute expert on stuckness. So for me, it's more about stubbornness. There's just at some basic level, there's a part of me that says, well, if you're already enlightened, why do you have to do all this stuff? And so it's just this attitude that actually is a skewing of the basic view of understanding, that one indeed has to be acting mindfully and with awareness and with compassion in one's ordinary life and identity. And there's no enlightenment without that going on too. But I do find that there have been times, well, in all honesty, I just stopped all practice. I have to say that's a while back now. That hasn't been for probably 15 years at this point, where I would do absolutely nothing and just feel like I'm not even sure this is for me. And that was always a situation where I really had to wait for the path to bring me back. I had gotten myself so far off the path that I was not likely to find it on my own again unless there was some grace from the path that brought me back. And often there was, and it would be someone inviting me to a particular teaching or letting me know the Dalai Lama was coming to town to give an empowerment, or I was in Barnes and Noble and a particular book caught my attention. All kinds of things could just bump me out of that and bring me back. What it's more like now is that there's a part of me that will say, oh, this is a lot of practice to do. And where I'll want to do less of it. And so where I am now is in, I will not let myself off the hook entirely anymore. And fortunately, I don't want to be let off the hook entirely. I will always do some practice, and I'll kind of dance with my ego self by sitting down and saying, okay, so what will you do today? Will you sit there with that cup of coffee and do some sitting meditation? Or do you want to do some Tonglen right now? Or are you really into some of these prayers that the Dalai Lama does that you want to recite today? And basically give my ego a choice, which has at its heart the fundamental lack of choice. We're going to do something here. We're negotiating. My enlightened self and my non-enlightened self. And so that's more how I work with the stuckness now. And it's kind of, I guess it's like saying, I'm just going to get one olive out of the bottle. And very often what I find is if I just start with some practice, any practice that ego has said, okay, all right, we'll do that. That everything transforms just in the process of doing that practice very, very frequently. Things will start flowing again. There'll be that positive feedback where I'll go, yeah, that felt right. That felt good. Let's do a little bit more. Let's do a little bit more. So working with it in that way. But I've also learned that if I do that one and ego says, okay, that was the deal, just that one for today, that I'm not going to beat myself up. You know, I'll walk away from the formal practice for that day and come back to it fresh the next morning. It doesn't get a week off. I'll be back the next day. But every once in a while, just saying to my ego self, I recognize this is tough on you. I recognize this is bruising. I recognize that this is really about, you know, the vanishing of ego and the transformation of ego is more accurate. And so to say, ego's like a baby on the battlefield here, to recognize that and be compassionate towards myself that's trying to do this. And it's all got to start with loving kindness. If you don't have that, it's going to be very hard to cultivate loving kindness for others. So you've got to start nurturing that baby on the battlefield. So I hope that's a little helpful.
That's lovely. Thank you.
There's a clicking in the background, and everybody else is muted, so it might be your jewelry clicking or something.
Thank you. And one of the questions, what have we learned on the path? I had sort of forgotten that I had learned this until you were speaking, which is lovely. I used to go to a lot of 12-step meetings. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I was had friends and loved ones who were. And they used to say that even if someone had stopped drinking, that the disease was progressive. And if somebody started again, you were, you'd already progressed even in that absent time. And I discovered that the spiritual path is the same way, that even when I have fallen off or been stuck or whatever, when something happens that triggers it, just something, examples that you shared, all of a sudden, it's like a lightning strike. Everything comes back.
Yeah.
And it has progressed in that space. Mm-hmm. Everything comes back with understanding. And so that is a lovely thing that I have learned, but I don't want to forget it. So thank you for that reminder. Thank you.
Well, and you reminded me that one of the good things about being stuck from time to time is that at the end of that, when you come out of that, if it's been a period of time, it's about stuckness in another way. It's about what's stuck to you, what's stuck with you from before, what's really a part of you that didn't go away in this period when you wandered off the path. And so those periods can really bring that into sharper focus, where you realize, oh yeah, I really do understand and feel like I've taken on board this particular set or kind of teaching. And that can be very useful. So there's nothing negative on the path. And that's one of the hardest things for our ego minds to get used to. It's all the path, even the stuff that we don't like.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Your excellent presentation. And I think you're already adding shimmer to the sunlit sky, as you say.
Oh,
so appreciate that today. And I was also impressed with, it seems to me like you've started out as the Baptist, and then you went through a progression, and you're doing other practices as well, such as the Tai Chi. So you're integrating a lot of the practices. The body practices is very important, because I find that and I did yoga, Kundalini yoga, and practice with that. And it's very, you really have to get into the body, the mind, and the spirit, the whole ball of wax, and try to integrate that. And I think you've done that quite well. And there are all these trials and tribulations along the way, and stumbling blocks and backtracking, but that's just part of the journey, And so if you can let go of that, and then I think it just develops. And I think the state that you're looking for with the Buddha enlightenment is just the access to knowledge that comes forth from you.
which is the true knowledge.
Mhm.
So thank you very much. So.
Well, thank you, Jerome. Jerome, where are you? There's that lovely Buddha behind you.
Well, I'm in North Carolina, but this Buddha is from the Chonyin Monastery in Carmel, New York.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you've been to it.
I have not.
It's got, it's got a, what they call is I think it's a 38-foot Buddha. And the Buddha is Vairocana, who's the highest Buddha. And he's the Buddha of light. And it's worth a visit to. It's 38 feet tall, and it's got all sorts of these figures around it. And they actually had to build. It took 3 years to build the Buddha. It's concrete, I think. And then they couldn't build the building until they got the Buddha, and then they built the building around the Buddha. So, but it's they have several facilities there, but it's. I toured that a couple of years ago, and they have monks, and they come out and do a little demonstration and chanting. And in the front there, you put in they bring fruit. You have to bring an offering and put it to the Buddha. And they have like 10,000 Buddhas, little Buddhas in the background all around. So it's a wonderful place to visit. And it's so relaxing. And then you hear the chants but it's just a wonder. And the Buddha is white because that represents the purest form and the highest form, which is light. So it's a light being. So anyway, that's what that's about. So
how beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for your comments.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Well, Deb, you remind me of my happy Buddha. Folks, I here on the panel, I just want to let you know that I've known Debbie for like 20 years and Skip too. So I can give a testimony to her feather lightness in heart. She's worked very hard, very diligent to center herself through her centering through her Buddha practice. And I have my little altar, and it says here, do more of what makes you happy. So I have the happy Buddha right next to me. So I keep that in mind when I'm stuck.
Very good.
To focus on increasing my vibrational frequency, which is the way spirit communicates. So with that, I just wanted to, compliment you and ditto to what Georgia said. And Nancy, you did a very wonderful presentation, and really it's a beautiful gift to us. And like the saying goes, love the giver more than the gift. So I love you, Debbie. This is wonderful. I have a little question though for you, because I know with you having peace in your heart, and now it's over, your cup overfloweth, and you are in the position to disperse and give your peace. You've chosen to do hospice work. So how does that affect you? I'm sure it's a give and take. How does that enrich your life?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Joss. It's very inspiring, of course, by the fact that I'm sitting with people who are actively dying in a hospice setting where their pain and symptoms are being controlled. And they are, for the most part, having a good death. It's often very, very inspirational. And I'm not a chaplain. I'm not there to be the chaplain on our team. But a vigil volunteer is someone who holds the space, including a general holding of spiritual space, silently from the context of your own spiritual path. In other words, you're offering what you can offer quietly to create a peaceful and compassionate setting for the person's passing. And often what you see is a very peaceful death and release. And a sense, a clear sense of shifting lights and sounds and energies, and a feeling of joy on many occasions. So I find it most of the time to be absolutely wonderful. I confess pediatric hospice is still challenging for me. And I find it much harder to work with the passing of a child. So that's something still for me to work more with. But it's all of a piece. And I feel like if that's something I am able to do, since many people aren't able to do that, then it's something that I should do, since I can be there at that time and be of a comfort to the patient and to the family members as well. And I'll just go in the room and often not knowing why I'm there, just stopping outside and pausing and praying that I can be of some assistance in whatever way is going to help the situation for the family in the room. It's often surprising, just by going in and paying attention to what's happening and what's needed and what's not needed, to what's called for from me. And I've also learned on rare occasion, but as needed, there are some occasions where I'm not the right one to be there. Something else is needed, someone else is needed, and to simply recognize that non-judgmentally and withdraw from the situation. It's, it never has anything to do with me. It has to do often with dynamics in the family. And in many cases where what they need is a social worker to be in the room. But there are other situations. So it's all practice. It's just more practice. And when someone's actively dying and often beyond consciousness, normal consciousness, I'm just sitting there doing practice silently and creating that environment and just hoping to raise the spiritual energy enough so that helps them connect with whatever their faith might be, or with whatever memories might comfort them and help them at that time. So I'm certainly not there to do Buddhist practice in any way that anybody would notice. In fact, my objective, which so far I've accomplished 100%, is that when I leave the room, no one knows a Buddhist was there. Just like the Girl Scouts, leave nothing behind.
Hello, Deborah.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you so much. I'm definitely getting a feather to wear.
Oh, good. Thank you.
those 5 or so spiritual concepts to keep in mind are very, very meaningful to me. And so to share on how what I've learned on my path, first of all, I'm in Canada and my name is Miles. And not too long ago, I thought I need to look up just what does Miles mean and where does it come from? And if you Google it and you go into one of these books of names, there's several different versions of it, depending on the language, but it does mean soldier. And then in another connotation or language, it means destroyer, which kind of doesn't. I might be working on destroying some things, no doubt. And the name fits me, I think, because I'm just really a soldier. And in fact, I told my wife yesterday, I said, you got to tell me to get on with it. I'm not a type A personality. And so that fits me. I'm just plodding along on my path. One of the things you said was that all experiences, good and bad, are meaningful. They're part of the path. And it was Hegel, Wolfgang, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, I think is his name, 18th century philosopher, said essentially what you just said, that all these experiences, good and bad, all of our learning, these all add up to the path, right? And now where did he get it from? I don't know, but obviously it's been there. These are ancient concepts that have been passed along. What I'm finding is that my spiritual path, curiously, started when I was listening to a Buddhist saying, everybody in the audience, was a Toastmasters meeting or conference, and he was a keynote speaker. He said, you had to be a well-rounded person. You're like a wheel, and you have to have all these different spokes. And one of the spokes everyone should work on or have developed is a spiritual spoke. So it's interesting. My path started with someone who's a Buddhist, Dr. Lee Poulos, and now you've given your presentation with so much more to add to what he said. This was back in the early 1990s. What I'll just conclude with is that I'm really convinced that, in fact, I just this morning watched a TEDx talk by a gentleman named Tom Chi, a brilliant physicist, astrophysicist, saying everything is connected. And in fact, the iron in our blood, the only reason we have iron, which we all share, it's important, it's necessary for the communication of oxygen through our system. According to this astrophysicist, we only create iron when galaxies collide. Like whole galaxies have to smash together. And he says, so that's one of the things that makes us connected to each other, is we're all from these colliding galaxies. Now, everything to me, certain things stick. And strangely enough, when Colleen Kiebert was on not too long ago, I raised a question about art, because in Canada, we purchased a piece of American art by Barnett Newman, and it's titled A Voice of Fire. And I'm now using it often in illustrations. And the Voice of Fire, which is just these three very simple stripes with a red stripe in the middle, what I feel is significance now of this painting that I thought was just ridiculous because we paid $1.8 million for it. I now see that red as blood. And, Skip, for example, he's oxygenated me in so many ways. And now I'm thinking, okay, now that I've been oxygenated, I need to take that and I have to try to share that maybe and then oxygenate somebody else. And we keep passing it on that way. So in summary, although I'm in Canada, I've been greatly influenced by American thought leaders. And so with that, Skip, Ralph Nader, I could go on and on. I feel it's shaping me to do something for others. And so I just will say that, and thank you very much. That's, I guess, the answers to your questions and how I've changed. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Miles. Yeah, I lived the first 10 years of my life way up in northern Maine, so far north, up outside of Presque Isle on a potato farm, that when we went to Quebec, we not only drove west, we had to go a little south. We were that far up. And so I've also always been partial to Canadians and always thought that you're very, very modest people and that the world could benefit from hearing a lot more from you. So please do share.
Debbie, go ahead. No, you guys go.
Thank you, Deborah. That was really wonderful. And I wanted to bring up something that you said about bodhisattvas as teachers that return to the world lifetime after lifetime. And when I was 20 years old, I met a Zen Buddhist man who I became my partner. He was well over 20, he was 26 years older than me. And I stayed with him till I was 33, and I learned about awareness, meditation, mindfulness. We went back to the land. And since you're from Maine, you might know Helen and Scott Nearing.
I don't know, sorry.
Okay. They were people that led the Back to the Land movement, but they were kind of our teachers. But this man that I was with, years later, he told me he was a bodhisattva. And and I really had trouble with his personality, his place in the world. And I left him when I was 33. We were not in contact for many years. About 10 years ago, we reconnected and visited each other. He actually moved to California, not far from me, to be with his son. And I reconnected with him, and then I saw him twice again, and then we were on the phone a few times. And I realized his personality was still there, and he kept insulting me. And I finally realized I needed to break with this man. And I told him, I said, that's it. His teachings aside, I'm still on a path, and I don't need his teachings, kind of. And when I said goodbye, and I knew I had to physically say goodbye and not just think it was over and think he'd know it was over. But I had this sense that I let go of lifetimes of being with this person. And it was just like this clearing. It was like, wow, I am done with this dark shadow. But really, a bodhisattva, a true one, cannot be a dark shadow, I don't think. So I'm confusing sort of the personality with the teaching. And so I still have my own practice that has developed on its own. But it was just that sense, Nancy, you asked if you've ever had an experience of the past life thing. I haven't personally, but I really got that sense that I let go of generations of this energy, actually.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Thank you. I suspect that whether or not one's talking about a situation like you just described in a Buddhist context with past lives, or just someone who's in Western analysis doing very deep work with bringing things up from shadow, there probably, in many cases, is that sense of something really being ancient and maybe not even being entirely ours in the sense of who we are in this current life. I've certainly had that happen before. I'm no expert on bodhisattvas. I am a bodhisattva in training. I have training wheels on. And generally speaking, when I read stories about bodhisattvas, they don't tend to go around saying they're bodhisattvas, but what do I know? Maybe some do. And so maybe he is, or maybe he's a bodhisattva in training, still working on some obscurations, but having that aspiration and perhaps being advanced in some ways, but not others. We're all kind of patchwork quilts, aren't we? And some of the patches are pretty, and some of them aren't.
Well, I'm thinking as I'm listening to the story that maybe he taught you the very lesson you needed to learn, which was how to do that.
Yes, I agree. I agree with John. Yes, he was your teacher at that time.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think we're all bodhisattvas when you think about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not a Buddhist myself, but I've been very impressed with really so many, particularly Tibetan Buddhism. I think there's many parallels between that and the Jungian path. It struck me that for some reason here in Sonoma County, a number of my psychiatry friends follow the Tibetan Buddhist path, and their practices are actually very similar in many ways, it strikes me. And for myself, I wasn't brought up in any formal religion or any formal path. I've never really walked a formal path. I've tried this, I've tried that. Particularly, I found the Jungian path to be very informative and helpful. But basically, I have my path, and that's the only path. And a lot of times, what I find is the only step I can see is the next one. I don't know what's beyond that until I take that step. And the other thing that I found, which at first surprised me, but now I've become very comfortable with it, is that it strikes me that it's never the same path twice.
Right.
Even though I've been there many times,
I
have to find a new way to get there. And it's the same work all over again in a different way or on another level or something. But I really thank you for what you presented today. Again, it's reminded me of so many of the things that are important, you know, as we do this kind of thing, do this walk, this work.
Thank you. And it's interesting from living with Skip. I've certainly come to appreciate that there are a lot of crossovers and ties and similarities between Jung's work and Tibetan Buddhism in particular. It's interesting that in Tibetan Buddhism, there was never a word for Buddhism, you know, that translated as Buddhism until there was contact with the West. They only had the word Nangpa, which means those who search for the truth within. And you know, that really captures it more than just the label slapped on by the West that the Tibetans eventually said, well, if they keep using it, we have to use it too. Yeah, that feeling of, I know what you mean about only the next step, if that being clear, or even at times only the step you're taking. And everything else is just concept anyway. It's a projection. And that's why the map is not the territory. The map is a projection. And it might have its uses, but we should know it for what it is and not over rely on it. And so trusting the way it sounds like you do, that it's okay to just be focused on the step that you're on, and maybe on the next step that you can see yourself, you know, moving towards. Nothing wrong with that. I would say that is the path. And it's just unfolding as you move with it. It's that dancing feeling again.
You mentioned neuroscience before, and for a while, maybe 10 years ago, I studied a little bit, mostly in groups, but a little bit one-on-one with Yonggi Mingyur Rinpoche down South Bay here, before he went on his big retreat, disappeared, you know. But there were a couple of times that were really fascinating to me, but one of them was when Daniel Richardson came. He's the one who did the research at Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, on Tibetan Buddhist meditating in a neuroscience.
Oh, yes.
So he came and he sat there with Yonggi Mingyur, and they went back and forth where Yonggi would say something in Buddhist language, and he would say exactly the same thing in neuroscience language.
Yeah.
And then he would say, you know, and they go back and forth. It was just so fascinating to hear the same process talked about in such different words and such different points of view. I really love that.
Yes. Yeah. It's a wonderful time to be living when so much of this is coming out from neuroscience, from quantum physics, and all of these traditions that had kind of been locked up within their own national boundaries before there was the internet and communication. And it's all just coming up now. And you know, we get to be at the banquet table for the feast. And in a way, the challenge is not to overgorge. And challenge is to figure out, okay, what do I need from this feast that's going to move me along? But it's just wonderful to have so much to work with.
Yeah.
And I guess our penance for that is we also get such amazing crises to work with together as well.
Oh, yeah. So Jordan wanted to make a statement.
Yes, please. First off, poetic thanks to you. I mean, it commented in the chat, but your presentation it felt like songs of experience making graceful calligraphy in the sand. that when the tide came in, it would be all gone. But I did see it. And so that was enough. And I've always considered myself a dyslexic gardener. I work like heck through the spring, through the fall. I used to be architecturally. But then I garden self in the winter. It's just always been, and it's a different kind of perennial. And what's interesting is I closed my architecture firm down in 2014, and in 2015 intentionally took what I called the long road home 5-year radio silence, and did some pretty intense psychological work there. And my life hadn't fallen apart. It just came on me that I need this rite of passage. It's time to turn to me and with a professional. And so I did that. And I woke up from that, opened that up in February of this last year, 2020. And in the middle of the summer, there was literally, I saw my dog shake off an adrenaline dump after she and another dog started to get into it. And I went, when I shook it off and went, oh, lose the form and lose the pretty and lose the dimensions of architecture. You've had that chaff. There's something new, and that's the form giver and the energy. And it was almost immediate. The architecture transformed to the architecture of well-being. And that psycho-spiritual architecture was more resonant almost than ever. And I start doodling. Well, track forward in the fall, September-ish, and I encounter Becca Tarnas, and who's this Skip Conover dude? Her moderator. And I've come to realize, oh no, she's on his show. She's on his webinar. Okay, so I check him out and show up. And then soon after, we start the Participación Mystique Doodles. Well, all of the lose the form and lose the pretty just started amending my own soil in my garden. No more plants, no more perennials, just adding more healthy things on top and sitting with and walking with. And just last night, it came to me that, okay, you lost the form, you lost the pretty. What's all this problem solving stuff that keeps getting in your way, this critic? And every morning you're doing your mantra from Morihei Yoshiba, the founder of Aikido. And it was the kind of thing where all of a sudden, oh, why don't you lose the mazes too? You can get stuck in a maze. But when I used to walk the labyrinth each morning, literally out and on the land, even before coffee, which was almost sacrilegious to me in a way, there was never a decision to be made. It was the thing that came in the middle of the doodles, stay the course. Except today, as you were doing this, it almost felt in the overarching things you expressed and shared, and so many gems. I paid several pages, copious notes they had to be written down. It wasn't watch it again. I'll listen more the second time too. But it's as if you were nodding to me on the path saying, did you forget to amend the soil of the labyrinth? Before you water it in, you want to add a little more? Mm-hmm. And that to me, one was poetically beautiful, but then leading up to this tiny but large synchronicity, last week I had found a feather with a golden tip. and I hadn't picked up a feather on the East Coast since I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, out on 50 acres, where there were what's the totem of the day, so I picked it up. Well, this morning I find the same kind of feather. It's about 3 inches long, black, with a little golden pointed tip.
Oh, how beautiful. And
I picked it up. And of course, then you have feather. And, I kind of got this cascade of evolution tingles of, thanks for telling me to amend the soil before I watered it in. Because once I do, it's too late. To me, it's like concrete set to cure. It's like, you better have got the mixture right, because you can't add anything after. Mm-hmm. But so in that bigger synchronistic and even my dyslexic gardener way, thank you, because this put a wonderful capstone, if you will, that this kind of took off. to open the vessel more and let that air come through. And so this, to me, thank you, heartfelt thanks, and I appreciate putting up with me going at length through this step by step along this past story, but today set it to where stay the course means even so much more now. And it's as if I opened up to the preparation was complete again. And now going back to perennial naturalization. So thank you, because it was quite a moving experience that it's like, frankly, it's like two people driving 100 miles an hour in Texas, one on the on-ramp and one on the highway, but there's courtesy. They're like, oh, look at them. They're sinking. Just stay right where you are and they'll drop right in front like a blood cell. And you're like, wow, they're driving like they mean it. Love you, whoever you are in that car. Whereas here, it's all cut in and all this staccato stuff. But today, it felt like driving on the highway in Texas in long form, where you were just putting things in that went almost like a mola. It's like this bead goes, well, here's another bead, and you're filling spaces and leaving the spaces between. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh my goodness, Jordan. Well, thank you. You give me more credit than due there, but I love your very poetic and organic way of talking about it, because it really is. And after all, I mean, this is all, the spiritual path is about life, about living fully. What could be more organic than that?
Right.
And so I really appreciate, the way that you were describing that. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And I like driving 100 miles an hour, by the way.
It's cool, and it's better in different gears.
I have done that.
It's better in different gears.
Yeah.
So if you would mute Debbie, I have
Sure.
All right. So I have a final surprise for everyone, even for Debbie, because she's not here. Is there anyone here now, you can raise your hand, who wants to take a guess on where Debbie and I, from what tradition Debbie and I took our wedding vows? No guesses. Okay. Susan said something, but
in 1989.
In 1989. Okay, Jordan wants to guess. Go ahead, Jordan.
I'll guess, because it's more expensive to do no action than to make a mistake and do something. So, first thing that came to mind, and I'm just going to go with it, and it may be stated obvious, but Shinto of the earth?
Nope.
All right. Well, opportunity for learning.
Okay.
Next.
Well, I have our vows here, so I will share them with you. And because they might help you to understand how Deb and I live together. Okay. Okay, so
without killing each other.
yeah, so our vows came from the Prophet by Khalil Gibran. So they came from Islam, Sufism, mystic Islam. And here's what Gibran said. Then Almitra spoke again and said, "And what of marriage, master?" And he answered, saying, "You were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. You shall be together when the white wings of death scatter your days. Aye, you shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be space in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone. Even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts, and stand together, yet not too near together, for the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow. So I did not read that at our wedding. My best man read it. As you see, I've never been able to read it without getting emotional. So, but that's where we're from. Okay, I'm going to mute again, Deb, and you're going to close up the meeting.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that, because certainly a part of being able to stay on the path is having a partner who supports you and knows how to support you on the path. And that's been just crucial in this life. And so thankful for Skip in so many ways. And I learn a lot from him all the time, too. He has this wonderful way of bringing new things in. Creative doodling, Jordan. I never would have known about that if it hadn't been for Skip. And the yogas of Patanjali and the Radiance Sutras, all of those came to me through Skip. So the wonderful parts of my spiritual life that only came through partnership. So, but anyway, I'm looking at the clock. It's 3 o'clock, and y'all may be used to going this long, but I'm sure not. Are we about done? Is everybody happy? I don't want to cut it off if there's someone who's got something pressing they want to say, but if we're coming to a natural conclusion, then that's fine too. So is there a hand raised, Hun? Is that? No, I guess that's not a hand raised. No.
Thank you for the partnership with the path. That just such a good lead up. Thank you.
There's been a rich conversation going on the YouTube channel as well.
May love be your guide on your path always.
Well, thank you all. And I wish you all well on your paths. And I don't know, the time may be coming where more sharing like this of what we're learning and how we're growing. You may have started something, Nancy. Thank you.
I like the instigator. We're going to have to get you a cape. A big eye on the front, but it has nothing to do with ego. It's the instigator.
So there are many rich conversations or rich statements going on in the YouTube channel. I'll just close with the follow-up to the last one. You probably can't hear me, but Tammy says this was.
No, they both muted. Oh, we're not.
Don't be surprised if, like Jordan, you all start having feather synchronicities. It happens. But thank you all, and I bid you a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Nancy.
We're just going offline, but
Aloha.
Aloha.
Mary's an analyst.
So.
Anyway, peace, everyone.
Bye.